So much going on the Oklahoma football front. Of course, there's a bowl game, but while most times that would take center stage and certainly would in years and decades past, it's much more about coaching, recruiting, and the transfer portal. We will get into all of it, including the matchup against Oregon in the Alamo Bowl right here on Oklahoma Sooners Live for the next hour right here at the Voice of College Football. Jason Ray, of course, here to make it all happen from Last Word on College Football. Please join his work there again on Last Word on College Football. Leave those questions and comments with us as well. Jason, Merry Christmas. I don't want to forget to do that, so I'll say that right out of the gate.
Yeah, Merry Christmas to you too. Like you said, Mark, it's weird this time of the year. Typically, you're over the initial recruiting side of it from the early signing period, and then you're moving on to bowl prep, or even in Oklahoma's history, really more kind of playoff prep and stuff like that. But it's a little bit different this year with the coaching changes and everything in flux, and Oklahoma focusing on a lot of stuff in the late signing period based on the timing of everything. So there's, like, to your point, a lot going on right now.
So, Jason, with Brent Venables assembling a coaching staff, where do we stand there? What work has yet to be done?
Yeah, so the coaching staff, by and large, is set. There's two positions that are remaining, which would be the defensive line coach and the in the defensive backs, particularly the cornerbacks. So Brandon Hall was probably the latest addition to the defensive staff, who will be a safeties coach, and he'll probably be one of the special teams coordinators. Who really, it's a big need for Oklahoma. Riley did not have that towards the last few years, and really didn't put a lot of focus on that side from a special teams perspective. So I think having that focus will be nice for Oklahoma, just kind of coming into the next few seasons. So really, from what I've been hearing, Mark, there's about 4 names, 2 on each side. One of the things that I've heard is kind of the holdup was that a few of these guys that were possibilities were still coaching in the playoffs, and so 3 of the 4 names that I've kind of heard been floating around are absolutely still in the playoffs. So from the defensive line side, Todd Bates continues to be a name that I hear a lot about. Great recruiter from Clemson, defensive line coach. He's a guy that's still in the mix. But the other guy that I've heard in the mix is Trey Scott. Trey Scott is the defensive line coach at the University of Georgia right now. So those are the 2 guys that I hear more than anything. On the defensive line side and the cornerback side, those are going to be 2 coaches that are currently with Georgia and Alabama. So Jamil Adai is a guy that I've heard, as well as Jay Valai from the Alabama side. Those are the 2 guys. I think one of the things coming into this, Mark, was interesting. Would Oklahoma do what they needed to do from a financial perspective to be willing to spend the money that's needed to bring some of these guys in? Some of those guys aren't going to be cheap. Specifically, a guy like Valai, I think, he's upwards of $800,000-$900,000 from a positional coach from the Alabama perspective. But it seems like Oklahoma is all in on doing whatever they need to do, not only to be successful on the field here next year, but position themselves in a good way for the SEC. And I think they've got a good mix. We thought that this might be the case, and it's really turning out to be this way, Mark, that Oklahoma is looking, and Venables specifically is looking at bringing a mix of guys that he knows and he's comfortable with, whether it be at Clemson or whether it be guys that he previously worked with along the way, either at Oklahoma or at Clemson, and a mix of guys that have SEC experience. So if that ends up being the case at the defensive line position and the cornerbacks position as well, that will be obviously a big value add for Oklahoma going into the SEC.
Now, Brandon Hall spent quite a bit of time at Oklahoma, so that's where he got to start. Student assistant, graduate assistant, a defensive assistant in 04 and 05, so he hasn't been on campus. Well, then he popped up in 2011, so he came back in 2011 for 1 year as a defensive quality coach A lot of stops to the FCS level, a bit of high school experience. And then once he got back from Oklahoma in 2011, Arkansas State, Auburn, Jacksonville State, Troy in particular, where he spent the bulk of his time since 2018. So 4 seasons at Troy most recently before coming back to Oklahoma. So he knows Oklahoma football through and through. No question about that.
Yeah, no, and I think, like I said, there's an interesting mix. You've got Miguel Chavis, who has been brought on. He was a quality assistant. He was an off-field guy for Venables at Clemson, who's coming over. That will certainly be a guy that Clemson people feel like it's a tough blow. And I think another guy that is really kind of behind the scenes. I think his name is Thad Turnipseed, who is a guy who was really Dabo's right hand man from a kind of a player control person, and he was at Alabama previously, and really I think he's a guy that's going to work behind the scenes a lot. I think he was a director of the director of kind of player personnel for Alabama, then the Clemson, now Oklahoma. So that's a valuable guy as well. So this mix of guys that he's comfortable with, whether it be guys that currently were on the offensive staff already, that have just done a really good job, like Cale Gundy, Bill Bedenbaugh, DeMarco Murray, Joe John Finley's a few guys, and then bringing in a guy that like Jeff Levy, with the experience that he has on the offensive side of the ball, not to mention, the SEC side. So it's an interesting, I think it's a very diverse staff when you talk about some of the guys that have been with Oklahoma for quite some time, and then you talk about some of the guys that Venables trust, whether it be guys that he's had with him, at Clemson, guys that he has had with him, whether it be an on-field or off-the-field role at Oklahoma, as you mentioned, with Brandon Hall, and then some of these guys that bring in just a wealth of knowledge and a wealth of coaching experience from the SEC. So I think it's shaping up to be a very good staff that most people will be excited about. I think the one thing that the jury's, I think the one hire that the jury maybe still a little bit out was a little bit, maybe not concerning, but just the thought process was Ted Roof from a defensive coordinator perspective. So I think, some of the things that I know and I've heard is what Bob Stoops did when he was initially here. He had a big control over the defense. He even called some of the plays early on, and I think Venables is more than likely going to kind of take that same role early on, and being a little bit more hands-on than you would normally expect. And but from everything I've heard, Ted Roof is an outstanding recruiter who has ties really all across the country with his all the stops that he's made along the ACC and the SEC. So I think I would expect it maybe be more of a defensive coordinator in name only, and more of an assistant, at least early on, being, Venables' eyes up in the press box.
Folks, we will continue the conversation concerning the coaching staff. We've got recruiting to get to, the transfer portal, a particular tight end coming in from Missouri here in just the last few hours. We'll hit on him and everything else that you've would like to bring up there in the live chat. We'll take your comments and questions, but we'd like to turn our attention to the Alamo Bowl. Yes, there's a football game to be played. We got Ryan Winter on the line from Sports Chat 503. Ryan, it's been all of about, 12 hours since I talked to you, but so thanks for coming back. Appreciate that.
Appreciate you, Mark.
Jason, Ryan, Jason, both these guys do outstanding work on their own behalf, but certainly have bailed me out constantly when it comes to Oklahoma and Oregon football coverage. So very much appreciate that. So Ryan, I'm going to get you revved up, and then I think this may work a little bit better if you guys go back and forth about what you hope to see next week, because I get the honor of talking to both of you on a regular basis. So just give us the lay of the land for the Oklahoma fan, Ryan, that's going to see a different football team next week.
Well, hey, what's up, Jay? Good to see you, man. Happy holidays to everybody out there. Yeah, the Ducks are in some serious transition. We all know this. Both these teams are, it feels like. There's kids going to the transfer portal. There's kids declaring to the NFL. Starters are leaving this program for both of those. And so, yeah, you on paper, it looks a little younger than we thought we were going to see just a couple weeks ago. But I think it's going to be a great game. I think both these teams have incredible recruiting and incredible depth, have shown this year with the amount of injuries Oregon's had. And I think they're going to be putting themselves in a really good position. I think both these teams want to end the year with a win. They've ended the season so poorly. Both these teams had high expectations, and now we find ourselves in the Alamo Bowl. In any other given year, it feels like the Alamo Bowl is a great bowl. This matchup, any other year, feels like it's a great matchup. I mean, this could be a CFP matchup. It just feels like this year for both these teams, it's a little bit of a downer coming from where the highs that you were in just a month or so ago. To where you're at right now. But I do think Oregon's got a good shot in this one. It's all about if they can score points on offense. I think Oklahoma's going to score on Oregon. It's just whether or not Oregon can score on Oklahoma.
Yeah, Ryan. I mean, I just echo a lot of that from the Oklahoma side as well. To your point, it's a little bit of a disappointing ending to where both of these teams thought that they would be. I mean, particularly from the Oklahoma side. I mean, a lot of people thought this could be the best Oklahoma team that they've had in 10, 12 years, and it really just didn't manifest itself on the field, whether that be, Riley had one foot out the door, halfway through the year, whatever it might have been, they just weren't as productive. I think on the offensive line was a bit of a, one of the biggest disappointments overall in this team, just really not at the level that they've been over the last few years. And I think, one thing that you mentioned, a lot of kids either opting out or hitting the transfer portal. Oklahoma's got 4 players on defense that have opted out, in terms of early entrances into the NFL. They've got 3 or 4 on the offensive side that have hit the transfer portal. Jaden Hazelwood's probably the biggest name, has moved on to Arkansas already. Spencer Rattler and Austin Stogner from a backup quarterback, and then the starting tight end perspective have moved on to South Carolina. So yeah, it's a little bit of a just to see some of these younger kids, see what they can do and see their level of preparedness and level of just readiness to go. And I think one thing, it's always me and Mark were talking, it's always interesting the mindset coming into these bowl games. Do teams like how much do they really care about being there? I mean, exactly to your point, when expectations were maybe higher, whether it be Sugar Bowl, Rose Bowl for the Oregon side or a CFP game. So I think the mindset, especially with an interim coach on both sides of this, is very intriguing, as much as anything in terms of that matchup. And Oklahoma's got obviously Bob Stoops coming back to coach this game, and then they've got some they've got some coordinators who typically don't coordinate. Brian Odom's coming back for Oklahoma to call the plays and to be the defensive coordinator in this game, and then he'll go back to USC afterwards. So it's an interesting dynamic that you don't see a whole lot. So I'm really looking forward to the game, and I think it'll be a great one.
Yeah, I agree. I think we're dealing with this very similar situation where you had basically when Cristobal left, Rob Mullins, the AD, had a conversation with the entire staff and basically said, okay, nobody's leaving. You guys are going to have to stay here throughout the bowl game. These guys want their money as well, right? All those extra little stipulations in the contract are if you coach the bowl game, right? So I think there's incentive to be there. I was pretty impressed though, because this staff had a lot of guys leave. I mean, Ken Wilson, linebacker coach, become the Nevada coach. Offensive coordinator Joe Moorhead takes the Akron job. Tim DeRuyter is going to Texas Tech to be the defensive coordinator, and all these guys are on staff right now, staying in Eugene, coaching out throughout this whole thing. Mara's the only guy that left. So I think it's going to be an interesting thing going forward to see exactly what you get with this team. I do think you're going to see a team that once they put the helmets on, once they put the pads on, kids are going to get fired up and ready to play. Maybe 2 weeks out, maybe there's a little bit of a malaise hanging over both these programs. But I think once the ball gets kicked off and everything gets strapped up, I think it'll be a pretty exciting game.
You would think so. The Alamo Bowl's always a highly rated game on television. It's always a top 7 or 8 rated bowl game, something in that range. And as I make the comment all the time, when bowl games get disparaged to a certain extent, hey, it's the only game in town on that particular date and time, and College Football Nation is going to be watching. People love to watch bowl games during the holidays. So, hey, if you don't want to, either one of these teams or programs can look back upon a number of situations, but most closely connected to Oklahoma would be the Cotton Bowl situation with Florida. And that is just a bad look. It's one thing when a North Carolina goes to the Orange Bowl last year without 2,000-yard rushers, its top 2 receivers, its best defensive player, and Mac Brown still prepares the team, doesn't whine and complain about it, says we're going to prepare for a football game and give it our best, and they gave it a great shot. They still lost, but they played a top 5 team, Texas A&M, down to the last couple minutes. Mm-hmm. Great showing on a big stage, versus you contrast that with Dan Mullen basically bailing on his team, kind of disconnecting himself from his team and saying, well, that's really not our football team. And then it just showed on the field, the attitude and the personnel groupings and all of it. And then it just becomes a bad look on a major stage. And for Florida football, it became something that added on to the stockpile of Dan Mullen issues that carried it through the offseason, because it's obviously the last impression, and it's a big one on a big stage, regardless of people putting an exhibition type tag on it. It's watched by a lot of people, and it added on to the Florida football environment from a negative standpoint. And we see where we are a year later there.
Yeah, I agree. I think, I'm sorry to jump in there, Jay. I think this is a huge game for both these teams going into next year. I think Oklahoma and Oregon both see this as a real springboard for that next year's season. What would you think, Jay?
No, absolutely agree. And I think a lot of people think that these games are meaningless, and I definitely disagree. I mean, I think with the opt-outs, it's kind of taken a little bit of a luster off some of these games that we've seen over the last few years. But no, I mean, to Mark's point, the winner of these games can give them a big bump in the next year. And I think let's not undervalue the fact that the additional practices that these kids get, specifically the younger kids that maybe didn't necessarily have a great opportunity to get in the 2 deep or 3 deep or see a lot of playing time, that now will get just a valuable just these valuable practices and valuable game time coming into the season. And it's not always, it could be a bad trajectory, to Mark's point, exactly what happened with Florida. It started bad with this Cotton Bowl last year, and then it ended even worse for that Florida team this year. So yeah, I think this could be a good springboard for both of these teams coming into 2022, which may not necessarily have the same optimistic outlook that they had the beginning of this year. So I think it gives them a good springboard into next year, and seeing exactly what both of these programs could be in 2022.
So looking at the glass half full instead of half empty for all the stars and impact players that we will not see if you're projecting toward 2022. So I play the college football nerd and geek here, because I want to know personnel. I want to know who's next, what the next wave looks like for those 2 teams that I'm watching right there. And if Kayvon Thibodeau's not there, that means somebody else is grabbing up all those reps. And that's most likely somebody who's going to be impactful possibly to next season. So, Ryan, are those, who would be that collection of players, any handful of players that you're looking at thinking, hey, I know a little bit about this guy, or maybe he's played quite a bit, but he needs to make an even greater impact in 22?
Oh, I totally think so. The defensive side had so many injuries this year. I mean, just to think that they had these 3 really highly recruited defensive players in the last couple of years. Kayvon Thibodeau, number 1 player in the country. Justin Flo, number 1 linebacker on the West Coast. Mace Funa, Noah Sewell, all these guys really, really, really highly recruited, and they only got 1/2 of football all last year with them. I mean, the injuries hit this team very hard, and so immediately you saw guys jump in their place. You saw younger guys come up. So Braden Swinson's the big one, number 44 off the end. Brandon Dorless, number 3, has had a huge year this year in the middle, defensive tackle. Mace Funa has come back off injury, but all these guys were then also injured throughout the year as well. So, I mean, it was just a collective group effort this year. Obviously, KT jumped off the film because of his this stature, speed, size. It's very rare you get a combination like that. But even he was not necessarily dominant in games. There were a lot of times where he was used almost as a decoy on the defense. They double teamed him. They went to the other side. So really everybody else had to step up on this defense. So there is going to be some guys in the middle who are going to be really good to look forward to. Noah Sewell, I think, is one of the better linebackers in the country. He's going forward. He's going to be an absolute stud. That whole family are all awesome. Every single one of the brothers is D1 football. The brother, obviously, Penne, who's the most famous on our section, is now with the Lions and playing very well on the right side of that line, even though that Lions team is not that good. But I do think that Noah Sewell is going to be the next guy next year. I think he's going to be the guy. And then I think they get Justin Flo off the injury next year. You can be able to pair those guys up if they stay healthy. But this year is going to be kind of an interesting one because we've still got one guy, Verone McKinley, who was a finalist for the Thorpe Award, a very, very good player, had 6 interceptions this year, and we still don't really know what he's going to do with the NFL or not. You know, he has a possibility of maybe opting out to go to the NFL, but he hasn't said that yet. A guy from Texas probably wants to go back to the Alamo Bowl, play well, and maybe make that decision after the Alamo Bowl, but he would be a great one as well to watch out for. He's number 23.
Jason, anyone on the Oklahoma side that you're interested in seeing a little bit more of?
Yeah, I think so. I'd mentioned that Oklahoma's going to have 4 guys that had opted out early, to the NFL. They're not going to be playing on this game. A couple of guys from the defensive line and a couple of guys from the linebacker group. So, Perrion Winfrey and Isaiah Thomas are both from a defensive tackle perspective and then kind of a defensive end. So Reggie Grimes is a guy that's been really not played a whole lot. They'll get a good opportunity this year. He's probably the wave of the future in terms of the next best pass rusher on the end for Oklahoma. So I think that's a guy to look out for, not only necessarily in this game, but then moving forward. Brian Asamoah from the linebacker position, as well as Nick Benito. Nick Benito was one of the best pass rushers in the country, certainly one of the best on this Oklahoma team. So I think his production is probably going to be missed, probably more than the others. So I would at least not among the defensive line. So I would anticipate Marcus Stripling, who again, a lot of these guys were high volume snap takers, I guess is the best word to describe it. So not a lot of experience out of Reggie Grimes and then Marcus Stripling, but those are guys that, Stripling had moved over to the position from the defensive line to be kind of that jack linebacker spot for Benito this year. So he'll get the start and he'll get some playing time. And then, Brian Asamoah was probably Oklahoma's best linebacker this year. Certainly the best tackler in open field.
Oh,
yeah. And I just to jump in real quick. Yeah, I was talking with some guys the other night. They said basically that on the starting Oklahoma defense, anybody with over 20 or 30 tackles feels like they're almost drafted into the NFL at this point. And I know that's going to be a huge hit for them. Oregon maybe could be able to run the ball against them a little bit. We don't know. But yeah, these are 2 teams that are now, with the amount of talent they have on their roster, the future is going to this is going to happen. This is the future, obviously. If you don't get to that top end bowl, most of those guys are not going to play. They're all going to opt out.
Yeah, and I think that's why, for me, it was pretty refreshing to see Matt Corral's commentary about, about playing in their bowl game. He had mentioned, he felt like his team, believed in him, and he didn't even think twice about it. He's a guy that's probably going to be one of the first couple of quarterbacks taken in the draft this year at the quarterback position, and he talked about how much he felt like it would be owed. Not only to that team, but the coaching staff, the organization, just in general. So, I think that's a fresh look at it, that we really don't see that too much in a guy that's probably, I don't know, Marky, maybe you follow it more than I do, but just, definitely one of the top quarterbacks in this upcoming draft.
Absolutely. Got Ryan Winter here from Sports Chat 503. Please check out his work right here on YouTube, Sports Chat 503 with Ryan. Anything else we need to hit on? We'll let you go, Ryan, and get on with the rest of your day.
You're the best, Mark. Anything you need, man. Appreciate you.
Thank you, Ryan. Appreciate it.
See you, bud.
All right, good stuff. We appreciate Ryan being here. And again, if you have any interest in the Oregon Ducks, he's got a YouTube channel right here, Sports Chat 503. All right. Yeah, just announced online, coming through in various sources here in the last 4 or 5 hours. Tight end Daniel Parker out of Missouri caught 41 passes in his career, 12 of those this year and 3 touchdowns. Last was on the field November 13th against South Carolina, game in which he caught a touchdown pass. Has made his decision to come to Oklahoma. So not a prolific receiving threat, apparently, but he's known for his blocking and obviously could turn out to be a contributor.
Yeah, so I think this is really going to be a big position of need for Oklahoma, Mark. Specifically with Stogner, with Stogner leaving and going to South Carolina. Jeremiah Hall, the existing H-back, he's a senior. He'll be leaving after this game. So, and then Braden Willis. There's some thoughts that he may potentially either go to the NFL or leave to hit the transfer portal himself. So I think this is a big area of need. Oklahoma's really satisfied that to a certain extent with a couple of guys in this early recruiting period in 2022 with Jason Llewellyn and Caden Helms. But yeah, getting a guy that has experience and really, just to your point, Mark, not a volume pass catcher, but really good blocking tight end H-back out of the backfield was something that was needed, and I think something that Venables talked a little bit about just in terms of evaluating some of that talent on the through the transfer portal and possibly looking at that at several different positions. But this was a position that that Oklahoma found that what they felt like that was the right fit. And I think he'll be a good addition. Jeremiah Hall was mostly a blocker. Yes, he did make some catches out of the backfield, and was very multi-dimensional in that facet. But yeah, I think that will be a good addition for Oklahoma heading into this into this late signing period as well.
Yeah, again, I don't want to downplay his receiving skills. He did catch 41 passes in his career in the SEC and caught 3 touchdowns this past season. A bit of a side note before we get back to the news of the day and everything going on regarding coaches and player personnel moves and so forth. Of course, it was an interesting side note by, I don't remember the gentleman's name in the Oklahoma legislation that John is referencing here in the live chat, that he was looking to pass a bill in which a certain small section, extremely small section of highway. And when I use the term highway, based on what I read, we're talking about like a dirt road that leads outside the state, would be renamed Lincoln Riley Highway or something like that.
Yeah, I think probably that's a little much. I think, at this point, I think there's two people in this Lincoln Riley camp right now. There's the person that really wants to, okay, let's move on from this. It's part of the past, but I think there's still a certain segment of people that are really, really hurt. And I think it's come out this week what I had heard and what a lot of people had thought was these conversations were happening early on in the season. I think there's a few articles that have basically confirmed that there was conversations between Lincoln Riley's representation and USC as early as September. So I think a lot of people think, Mark, many of the thoughts that we had going into the season that Oklahoma had a really what was maybe was their best team on paper that they've had in quite some time. So I think the fan base has a feeling that Riley almost didn't give this year a chance with that. You've got to think that if his representation is having discussions with USC in September or even October, whenever it happened, he's got at least maybe not necessarily a foot out the door, but he's at least dabbling. He's at least unhappy. So it's got to you have to assume it's affect the coaching staff or his coaching or just the player, just everything going on. So, so I think there's a little bit of, but yeah, I think most people are ready to just kind of move on from that. Okay, it is what it is. It wasn't what Oklahoma fans had hoped, for this season, but I think Oklahoma is going to be in a. It seems like they're going to be in a better position. Maybe not immediately, but they'll be in a better position to where they were previously. The thing that we've talked about over and over here, Mark, is how Oklahoma hasn't been what they need to be on the defensive side of the ball. So you go get arguably the best defensive coordinator in all of college football to come. If that doesn't fix it, or if it doesn't get you to a respectable spot, then I'm not sure what will. So I think a lot of people, there's a renewed excitement. I think there's a renewed enthusiasm within the Oklahoma athletics department. I think whatever's happened here, whether it be late last minute with Riley, or whether it be something that had been orchestrated through a few months, whatever has happened, I think it's rallied the university together, and I think it's brought them forward in a place where they thought there's some things that maybe they weren't recognizing that they needed to do to be competitive. Not only in the Big 12 for either this last year or however many years, but going into the SEC as well. So I think it's going to be I think both schools, USC and Oklahoma, probably will end up being in a better position than what they were previously.
Yeah, I don't think it's a black and white or right or wrong, all or nothing proposition regarding the evaluation on the way Lincoln Riley apparently conducted himself during the football season, because I'm sure most of us, if not, most of us could in some way relate to considering another job while you're still at your current job. And because of the amount of money and because of the level of responsibility that's involved, that's a pretty long process, or could be, if you're in the situation Lincoln Riley is. On the other hand, to the negative aspect, because he's responsible for a lot of people and a lot of careers and a lot of jobs at what was his current position at Oklahoma, I think we can all again relate to wanting to be professionals, giving that attempt and being focused on our current job. But if we are thinking we're going to move on, then there's a certain part of us that is, of course, checking out of certain conversations or just thoughts about the future of that organization, because we don't anticipate being involved, even though no one knows it. So,
yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I mean, I think it's just natural, right? I mean, if if whether it be at this area or any occupation that you're in or any walk of life, if you've got another opportunity, you're not going to be as invested. I know the cliche thing is having one foot out the door, but yeah, I mean, I think that's that's very real, whether it be, and to your point, Mark, whether it be September, whether it happened, a couple of weeks before the Oklahoma's last game against Oklahoma State. It was it is what it is, and just I think the best thing is to move on and look to 2022 for both sides.
Absolutely. I think it's similar to these bowl games, and it's similar to a lot of games that we could conjecture about whether players are giving their best. I think there's a difference between a player can have the attitude that, hey, I want to do my best for my teammates. I'm here. I'm going to work hard. I'm going to do my assignment. I'm going to practice every day. And they go out there and give it a reasonable effort. They try. They want to try. But there's a difference between that, and especially in a game like football that has the intensity, or should, that it needs to play at this level. There's a difference between that and having a team that's just relentless, is on a mission, is purposeful, is just locked in, and just will run through a wall to win a game, versus just realizing and recognizing and wanting to be accountable and saying, I'm going to do my assignment. I'm going to try hard. I'm going to run hard. I'm going to do what I need to do, and I'm going to get through this. Completely different results can ensue from that. So, Jason, when we get to the recruiting here, you've got an interesting bit of a sidebar regarding a pretty high-level recruit who may turn out to be a walk-on to be able to accomplish what he wants to get done.
Yeah, it's such an interesting story, Mark. I mean, and I think it's a good story for this day and age when we talk about, when we talk so much about the role that NIL is playing in recruiting and just the dirty business of recruiting that we see. So, I think it had been widely speculated, wondering which happens when any coach comes over, I think, from another school, who's that coach going to bring with him, who's committed, maybe not necessarily as much to the school as they are to that coach that recruited them. So, and it happens everywhere. But I think one of the things that Venables had come out and talked about last week was that he felt like it was not ethical. He felt like it was not becoming of a head coach at a major university to basically pick apart another school's recruiting class. So he had made the decision, and I know he had talked to Dabo Swinney about this on multiple occasions. He had made the decision he was not going to actively or even inactively, I guess, proactively, however you want to say it, try to recruit any of the kids from Clemson over to Oklahoma. So there was a kid by the name of Jaron Koenig who had been committed to Clemson and had been committed to Brent Venables for quite some time. 4-star linebacker. He's really an athlete. He's kind of rated as an athlete on 247, but really projects to more to be a linebacker who was he was committed to Clemson, and then on National Signing Day, he did not sign. So much as in the 247, hard commits that Clemson had 13, they only had 12 signed. Dabo Swinney talked about this was going to be the 12 that they were going to have. So a lot of some of the crystal balls kind of started coming in for Oklahoma, and then on the back half of that, Venables kind of talking about what he's doing. So a lot of people didn't know where that would leave him, but earlier this week it was reported that Koenig is in the Oklahoma Sooner database, so he is an early enrollee, but has not necessarily signed a letter of intent with Oklahoma. So and he's not come out and said anything. Venables is obviously he can't comment about it at this point, given that he's not necessarily a signed with Oklahoma. So I think that the thought is here that he is going to be he's going to be a walk-on for Oklahoma until at which point he's given a scholarship. And I think there's a couple of ways to kind of think about this. First and foremost, I mean, when you're a 4-star kid, it's a little bit different than like a Baker Mayfield, right? That has, he didn't really have a whole lot. He walked on at Texas Tech, didn't have a whole lot of high profile scholarship opportunities, whereas this kid's a 4-star guy, one of the best rated athletes in the country at the prep level. So he was going to get it. He was going to get scholarship offers almost anywhere he wanted to go. So I think it'll him deciding to walk on and just he wants to be at OU, wants to play for Venables so bad that he's willing to walk on. I think he'll probably walk on initially. I mean, I think it'll almost force Venables' hand at this point. Like, okay, you want to be here that bad. I mean, I guess we'll have to. Okay, you twist my arm. We'll have to offer you a scholarship. So I think it's just really. I mean, it's such a cool story. I think from my perspective, just knowing that a player wants to play for an individual coach so bad that he's willing to walk on and really just kind of take the risk, there maybe not a ton of risk, but we're willing to take the risk of, okay, I want to play here so bad. I'm just going to go in and roll and force him to and force the school to give me a scholarship. So I think it's a cool, and it's going to be a cool story. And it's a position of need for Oklahoma. And so the ability to have him in early, compete in the spring, will be big for Oklahoma, just kind of moving forward. I don't know if I've ever heard. I don't know that I've ever heard a story like this for as highly of ranked of a kid that he is.
Absolutely. It is an interesting story, and he's taking the situation into his own hands to pursue what he would like and where he would like to be. So I think that's generally a good thing. So that shows his level of determination and so forth.
Yeah, and I think Mark, it kind of talks to. I think it kind of talks to the type of person that Venables is. I mean, I think he's bringing a different level of professionalism that maybe Oklahoma hasn't necessarily had since since Bob left. I mean, point blank, talking to people, Lincoln wasn't the most liked person among, not necessarily among his colleagues, not necessarily among his players, but just just in general. So I think that what Venables brings to the position isn't something that Oklahoma's had in a while, and I think you're seeing the evidence of this early on in this 2022 cycle, because he was able, along with some of the guys that were there previously, like Kel Gundy, Bill Bedenbaugh, DeMarco Murray, kind of helping keeping the wheels on the bus for some of these guys. But Kobe McKenzie is a name that Oklahoma fans are very familiar with. He's a kid that had been committed to Oklahoma for a couple of years, decommitted, committed to Texas, and then Venables had an in-home and recommitted to Oklahoma pretty much right away. And um, he's been as vocal of a kid that I've seen on the recruiting trail in quite some time. He has there's a lot of Oklahoma people who have been very active on Twitter. Oklahoma Twitter is probably one of the most active that there is in college football, and there's a lot of these guys that have been on some of these Twitter spaces over, and a lot of these are led by fans, and some of these are led by people that have kind of insight into the program, some of the beat writers. And Kobe McKenzie's a guy that has been in some of these conversations, and he's been very vocal about bringing some kids along with him. So there's about 6 or 7 guys that he has been very instrumental in kind of helping recruit to Oklahoma. So there's about 6 or 7 guys, not even necessarily counting the Koenig kid, that Oklahoma's in the mix on, in terms of in some of this late period. Just a couple of names to throw out there. 2 big names from the offensive line side. Cam Dewberry he's a guy that actually has committed to A&M. I think it's going to be interesting whether or not he will be let out of his LOI, because he signed the letter of intent. Then afterwards, in his name's, I think the last name is Henson, the A&M offensive line coach had moved on after that. So I don't know if that would be enough to let him out of the letter of intent for A&M, but certainly a guy, if he is let out of that intent, that Oklahoma would be very, very interested in, and Oklahoma was in the mix with him. Devon Campbell, who's a 5-star offensive lineman, it looks like he's might be trending Oklahoma's way, and Javante Barnes is a running back out of Las Vegas that DeMarco Murray has been really really been in there with him. Decided that he wasn't going to sign early, wanted to announce it at the All-Star game. Is another guy. Ahmad Moten is another 4-star defensive lineman there. So there's about 5 or 6 that Oklahoma's real. I mean, there's a few more that aren't as haven't went as far, just in terms of that kind of that recruit visit relationship just yet. But I think it just kind of shows it shows a couple of things. Oklahoma is moving about as far away from this speed D that they've kind of went, the moniker of Grinch. I think Venables has talked about having bigger, stronger, guys on the defensive line, specifically at the defensive tackle position. So I think they're going away with that a little bit. A little bit more. So Oklahoma's still setting at the number 10 spot. Wouldn't be surprised, if they can get some of these guys, they could end up in the top inside the top 10 before this is over. And if that's the case, it's just a massive win for Oklahoma and for Venables to come in as late as he did and be where he's at, and then being able to still bring in a top 10 class is really just remarkable, and shows to how good of a recruiter that he is. He was, like we talked about, he was a good recruiter at Oklahoma. I think he's just learned so much about coaching and all the intricacies of college football under being a head coach, being prepared for that. For exactly what he needed to be prepared for under Swinney for as long as he was. So I think it's only going to get better from a recruiting perspective, especially when they get those, when they get his entire coaching staff in here.
In a sense, you can liken it to being a salesperson in that you could take anyone, a number of people, not anyone, but anybody who's a reasonable professional, they're a good communicator, they understand and have a knowledge of their product, whatever that is, as a salesperson, or in this case, a recruiter. They know what they're selling, in quotes. They're good communicators. They can build relationships. They're friendly. They're likable. You can put that person out there, and you find this out in the sales world, that person can do a great job through like 90% of what needs to be done in contacting people, building the relationship, being friendly, likable, conveying all the information in a very clear way, and doing all that. But then there's something to closing. There's something to having the skills and abilities, whether that's innate or you learn it and enhance it, the art of closing. And a lot of people are good at all the other things, and they're very capable people, but it takes a certain kind of person, or certain kind of person just because they've learned it on how to then, when it push comes to shove and the rubber meets the road, can ask the right questions, make the right statements to take that person from, hey, I really like you and I like this university and I like your football program and you're under consideration, to, okay, I'm going to commit to Oklahoma.
Yeah, and I think what I think he's bringing, Mark, is the overall value of the Oklahoma brand. I think one of the strategies that Riley deployed, and it may be more of a strategy that I don't follow national recruiting as much as I do Oklahoma and just the area here. But I think Oklahoma in the past has really just kind of floated around offers like like it's not a whole lot of thought in the evaluation and who you're offering. And I think one of the things that Venable said early on was that he wanted an offer from Oklahoma to these kids to mean something. So they were going to do more evaluation versus offering so many kids. So, and I think part of it, you're going to see a renewed effort in the state of Oklahoma recruiting. I think he wants kids that really want to be at Oklahoma. And I think when you have kids that really want to be at a school versus they want to use the school as a conduit to their next destination, I think it helps from a team perspective, and knowing that you have a guy that will be there, that will help you get to the next level, but also you also have a guy that cares about you personally, and then wants you to be at this school, have some pride and have some ownership of being at that school. So I think it's an interesting idea. I hope it's one of those that really works out, and maybe getting an offer from Oklahoma will start to mean a little bit more, and they'll get more of the kids that just really want to be in Oklahoma.
Jim Tressel, when he was at Ohio State, made a similar comment about recruiting Ohio players. And you can take this to an extreme. And of course, that program would not, and this program would not just grab a bunch of 2-stars in state, just thinking they're going to try so hard. Of course, you can take it to, you have to have a certain level of talent on the field. But the thought that if, and he actually stated it, that, yeah, we are going to recruit nationally, but we're going to be very selective, because there is something to be said of recruiting a player. And I'll move the example from Ohio into Oklahoma. Recruiting, let's say, a kid in Ohio or in Oklahoma versus going somewhere else, just having a thought that when it's late in the fourth quarter against Texas or Oklahoma State and it's a difficult situation, there's adversity, there's a grind, there's just something else that needs to be down deep to push you across the finish line to get it done. Or maybe that's the extra rep in the weight room in March or whatever that is, that if you get somebody who maybe has loved this school, this program, this university since childhood, or has a great and deep affection for it, that they're going to do a little bit more that's going to push your team across the finish line when adversity strikes.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I mean, Ethan Downs is a perfect example. He's a guy that's probably going to get into the mix a little bit more on the defensive line now with some of those guys out. And he's a guy that, he's an Oklahoma kid. He's talked about, it was his dream. It was always his dream to attend the University of Oklahoma. And, for a true freshman, he played quite a bit in a rotational perspective. But I think he'll probably be one of the guys that are the starters. Not only this next season, this next game, but the next season as well. So, I think it's a different. I think it's not only a different mindset, but I think it's a different approach. I think for Venables versus Riley, it was well documented that Riley was more of a CEO type of a head coach. He was interested in the product on the field, not as much interested in kind of developing those personal relationships with some of those kids. So I think Venables will be a little bit more of the opposite, more dedicated to maybe not salvaging, but flourishing in some of those personal relationships with the kids. I mean, he's a very tough, hard-nosed coach, and I think he's always going to be that way, and it's evidenced by bringing Jerry Schmidt in from Texas A&M, who's going to he's a no nonsense type of a strength and conditioning coach, but at the same time, I think hearing some of these things from the players on are they excited, are they nervous, because there's a lot of horror stories out there about some of his workouts from previous years. So I think a lot of them are not necessarily have the mindset, we're not necessarily looking forward to it, but we're looking forward to what it's going to bring come Saturday. So I think you'll definitely see that a lot of that transition from the recruiting side to the field, where you're going to see I think you're going to see a team that Oklahoma people are going to like watching a little bit more, from a toughness perspective, from a from an assignment perspective, being a better tackling team, and just all of that kind of goes along with being a tougher, more disciplined football team, and so that will like I said, I think that will manifest itself from the recruiting side of it all the way to the play on the field.
Jason Ray makes our Oklahoma show work each and every week. We typically come your way every Wednesday at 11:30 a.m. Central Time, but with schedules changing and the holidays and so forth, we had to deliver a day later. But we hope everybody grabbed the notifications. And if not, if you're a little bit late, that's one reason to subscribe. Hit that bell for the notifications to know when we go live. But we've hit it about 90+% of the time on Wednesday, 11:30 a.m. Central Time, and we'll be back here next week. Catch Jason's work at Last Word on College Football as well. Jason, we appreciate it. Once again, Merry Christmas. Hope you have a great weekend with your family and friends.
Same to you, my friend. I appreciate you.
And for everybody else out there, we'll be back here next week. and check out everything. A number of questions came in concerning a number of topics that Jason and I reviewed earlier in the show. So as is always the case, we've got the most people online at the end of the show. So you've missed a ton. So the video will post here in about 15 minutes. So just go back and watch what you missed, and we'll be back here live next week.